Good morning, everyone. It is indeed an honor to stand before you, even virtually. To take part in this beautiful church is a holy endeavor to which I never take for granted. I want to thank Dave and Laura for just standing with you. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. Indeed, it's holy. Today, I'd like to share with you some insights into arguably the greatest biblical figure in the Old Testament, and that, of course, is Moses. The late Elie Wiesel wrote in his book, Messengers of God, the following: Moses was the most solitary and most powerful hero in biblical history. His triumphs and disappointments, his poetic inspiration, his complex relationship with God and God's people, no individual ever, anywhere accomplished so much for so many people. His influence is boundless. Moses was a supremely successful man, beyond measure, and it's successful people that write history. But we often forget highly successful people have typically failed more than so-called failures in life. The greatest and most successful people have learned to deal with rejection, bereavement, serious illness and loss, expectations unfulfilled, pain, hurt, huge setbacks. One thing unifies them: their resilience, however. Moses was no exception. That's why I titled this morning's sermon, The Resilience of Moses, Our Teacher. In Hebrew, we refer to Moses, our teacher, as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses in Hebrew is Moshe, Rabbeinu, our master, as if someone receives a master's degree, someone who has mastery over a certain area. Moshe Rabbeinu. It's very funny. When I was a child growing up in Detroit, an 11-year-old, because this is clearly 11-year-old humor, the synagogue that my family and I affiliated with was next door to a synagogue called B'nai Moshe. Again, Moses, Moshe. B'nai Moshe means the children of Moses. So as an 11-year-old, and here's 11-year-old humor, we used to call it not B'nai Moshe, we would call it banana mush. Now, the fear I have is that no matter what I add from here on out, the one thing that will probably stay with you is banana mush. So take that out of your mind. In any event, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our master. Let's look a little deeper into Moses' life as portrayed in the Hebrew Bible. Let's examine the legacy of the pain he endured, the vision he held, his successes and his shortcomings, but above all, his resilience. To begin with, Moses had an uncanny ability to live with contradiction, paradox. Life is filled with paradox, contradiction. Theology is defined by its ability to embrace tension and paradox. Moses, on the one hand, loved the Israelites, and at times he couldn't stand them. He had to approach Pharaoh when he was in Egypt at God's insistence, but he didn't want to disobey God on the one hand, but he didn't want to hurt Pharaoh, who was so good to him. The Pharaoh of Egypt saved his life. And how about the burning bush? How can something be on fire and yet not consumed? The ability to weigh contradiction, paradox, is certainly a sign of a sophisticated thinker, not a snooty thinker, not an arrogant thinker, but a sophisticated thinker. Moses had difficulty with his family, just like many of us. He was the youngest of three. There was tension between him and his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron. Comments were made about his wife Zipporah. Terrible comments, simply because her skin was dark. Aaron and the golden calf, tragic event in biblical history. Not only was it a betrayal of God, it was a betrayal of Moses, what he stood for, what he wanted to instruct the people in whom he was in charge. And then, of course, we know very little of his personal life, the relationship he had with his wife, let alone his two sons, which are basically lost after their mention in the first 5 books of Moses, Gershom and Eleazar. Was there estrangement, not enough time spent at home? What was the nature of his marriage? What type of father was he? After the first set of the 10 Commandments, what does he do? He shatters them. Moses comes down from the mountain and he sees the Israelites dancing around an idol, a golden calf. And he hurls the tablets out of his hands and they shatter. But what does he do? He holds on to these broken shards. Aren't there broken tablets in all of our lives? Broken dreams, expectations unfulfilled. We're always told to let go of the past. Moses learns from his past and literally carries his past with him. He holds on to those broken shards of the first set of tablets. The broken shards are holy. He knew that. They help shape a nation, and they can help shape character in all of us, that imagery of holding on to broken shards, the broken tablets. Moses knew that past events can help us become better people. Again, speaking to his resiliency. Moses gets angry. I would argue it's good to get angry, but it depends over what. I want good people to get angry over evil in the world, trickery, deceit, murder, cheating, stealing, wanton destruction. Problem is, for many of us, myself included, we get angry over the wrong things, trivial things. Contractor doesn't show up to our home, restaurants that confuse our order, our computer stops working, the entertainment screen isn't working on the airplane. Perhaps not counterbalancing a trivial expression of anger with the gift that is inherent into all of those things, to go to a restaurant, to have a contractor come to our home, to fly comfortably 5 miles above the earth's crust, and so on. Let's look at the biblical verse where Moses' anger is most popularized. It comes from the book of Numbers, and this is the verse on which I'm sharing with you. Chapter 20, verses 11 and 12, and I'm quoting. And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beast drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Moses is told to speak to the rock. He does that, but he does something that he's not told to do. He strikes the rock, and he strikes it twice. But his anger is not the reason why he's forbidden to enter the promised land. It's more complex than that, but that's for another time. But in keeping with the subject of this talk, the resilience of Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, what does Moses do after he's told by God that he can't enter promised land? He can't fulfill his primary goal in life, his lifelong dream? Before I address that head on, let me underscore that by quoting and paraphrasing the great 20th century poet, social activist, and playwright Langston Hughes. He writes in his classic poem, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?" So what does Moses do? He keeps going. He's back metaphorically at his office the next day. He's still connected, and he's still concerned. Moses was able to overcome. He was able to live through life's disappointments. His resilience is extraordinary. He's able to continue on in his life in spite of never being able to achieve his goal of reaching promised land. He didn't perceive himself as a victim. He didn't have jealousy or guilt. When you're in pain, you blame. He didn't blame. He didn't dwell on the setback. He kept going, and he kept working and contributing. And he knew all along, after that epic event at the rock that he struck twice, that he would not ever enter promised land. That is why the Bible speaks of Moses in the following way after he dies, having lived 120 years. And I quote towards the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verse 10. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out, panim el panim. The Hebrew's beautiful, face to face. The resilience of Moshe Rabbeinu, the resilience of Moses, our teacher. Let me offer you a very brief postscript by way of a prayer. Please, God, let us be inspired by the passion and resiliency of your prophet Moses. May we learn from him to never yield to our setbacks, regardless of whether or not we are fortunate enough to reach promised land. And together and humbly can we say, Amen.